Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see everything you do when no one's watching. Right now, in this very moment, you are building your future in the quietest corners of your life, not in the spotlight, not when everyone's applauding, but in those private moments when you're completely alone with your choices. I've watched it happen for over 3 centuries, studied it in my own life, and I promise you this truth runs deeper than any river I've ever sailed. The person you become, the life you create, the destiny that unfolds before you, it's all being written in silence, every single day. You see, I spent decades waking before dawn, not because anyone demanded it, not because I wanted credit or praise, but because I understood something most people never grasp. The world rewards what it sees, yes, but it only sees what you've already built in private. Your character, your skills, your wisdom, they're all forged in the hours nobody knows about. That book you read at midnight when you could be sleeping. That skill you practice in your garage when your friends are out celebrating. That moment you choose integrity when lying would be so much easier, and nobody would ever know the difference. I invented the lightning rod, helped birth a nation, created a lending library, and discovered principles of electricity that changed civilization. But none of that happened on stage. It happened in a print shop at 4 in the morning. It happened in my study, conducting experiment after experiment that nobody cared about. It happened in the spaces between the public moments, in the silence where I asked myself the hardest questions and refused to accept easy answers. And here's what breaks my heart. I see so many brilliant souls today, people with extraordinary potential, and they're obsessed with performance. They're measuring their worth by likes and followers and who's watching. They've forgotten that greatness isn't a show. It's a private commitment you make to yourself when the curtain's down and the audience has gone home. They're so busy broadcasting their lives that they've stopped actually living them. Your future isn't being built in your highlights. It's being built into your habits. Not the ones you post about, but the ones you practice when your phone is off and your door is closed. The real work, the transformative work, the work that actually matters, happens in silence. And if you don't understand this, if you don't embrace this, you'll spend your entire life performing instead of becoming. Now, let me be clear about something important. I'm not talking about hiding or being secretive or false modesty. I'm talking about understanding where real power comes from. I'm talking about knowing the difference between building something real and just building an image. Because, in my time, and even more in yours, it's easy to look successful without actually being competent. It's easy to appear wise without thinking. It's easy to seem disciplined without having any discipline at all. But life has a way of exposing the difference. Eventually, the person who practiced in private will surpass the person who only performed in public. Eventually, the knowledge you gained in silence will speak louder than any words you posted for attention. Eventually, the character you built when nobody was looking will be tested when everyone is watching, and that's when you'll discover what you really are. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine 2 people starting the same journey. Both want to master a craft, build a business, and create something meaningful. The first person documents every step. Every tiny victory gets announced. Every struggle becomes content. They're constantly checking to see who's watching, who's approving, who's impressed. The second person works in silence. They show up every day to the practice, to the learning, to the failing and trying again. They keep their progress private, not from shame, but from focus. They're not wondering who's watching because they're too busy actually doing the work. Who do you think, after 5 years, has built something real? Who has developed actual mastery? Who has the depth, the skill, the resilience that comes from facing the work itself rather than facing an audience? I'll tell you from experience. The second person has become someone entirely different. They've transformed. The first person has become better at performing the transformation. And that difference, my friend, that's everything. When I was a young man working in my brother's print shop, I made a decision that shaped my entire life. I decided to educate myself. I was apprenticed, had little formal schooling, and could have accepted that as my limit. But I didn't announce some grand plan. I didn't tell everyone I was going to become learned. I just started reading. Every spare moment. Before dawn, after dusk, during lunch, when others were gossiping, I taught myself mathematics, science, philosophy, and languages. In silence, in private. For years. Nobody knew I was doing this. Nobody was impressed because nobody knew. And that's exactly why it worked. I wasn't reading to impress anyone. I was reading to understand, to grow, to become someone capable of thinking clearly and acting wisely. The knowledge I gained in those silent years became the foundation for everything I later accomplished. But if I'd been focused on showing everyone how much I was reading, posting about every book, seeking validation for every insight, I would have learned far less. Because my attention would have been split. Part of me is doing the work, part of me is performing the work. And here's something crucial that I learned. When you work in silence, you develop a different relationship with the work itself. You're not doing it for the applause, so you can be honest about what's actually happening. If something isn't working, you can admit it and change course. If you don't understand something, you can sit with your confusion instead of pretending you've got it all figured out. If you fail, you can learn from it instead of managing how the failure looks to others. This honesty, this raw, private honesty with yourself, it's where wisdom lives. It's where growth happens. It's where you develop the ability to see clearly, instead of just looking good. And you cannot develop this if your primary relationship is with an audience, instead of with the truth. I remember conducting my electricity experiments. Dangerous work, honestly. Flying kites in thunderstorms, creating batteries, trying to understand this mysterious force that nobody comprehended. I did this for years before I published anything. Years of failure, confusion, incremental progress. If I'd been documenting every failed experiment, justifying every theory that didn't work, defending my process to critics who didn't understand what I was attempting, I would have given up. The social pressure would have crushed the inquiry. But working in silence gave me freedom. Freedom to be wrong. Freedom to explore. Freedom to follow curiosity wherever it led, without having to explain or justify every step. And that freedom is what allowed me to eventually discover things that advanced human understanding. You have that same freedom available to you right now. The freedom to work, to practice, to grow, to fail, to learn, all in the privacy of your own commitment to excellence. But you have to choose it. You have to resist the constant urge to broadcast, to prove, to perform. You have to trust that the work itself is enough, that becoming is more valuable than appearing, that your future self will thank you for the hours you invested in silence. Think about the skills you want to develop, the person you want to become, the life you want to build. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of your energy goes into actually building it versus how much goes into managing how it looks? How much time do you spend doing versus documenting? How much focus goes to the practice versus the performance? I'm not saying never share. I'm not saying hide your light. I published almanacs, wrote essays, and shared discoveries. But I only shared what I had first built in private. I only taught what I had first learned in silence. The sharing was overflowing, not the foundation. And that's the key distinction. Build in silence, share from abundance. If you reverse that, if you try to share before you've built, you're just creating noise. Empty words without weight, performance without substance. And the world has enough of that already. What the world needs, what your future needs, is for you to become someone real, someone with depth, someone who has done the work when nobody was watching and can therefore offer something genuine when they are. Let me tell you about my daily schedule, the one I followed for decades. I woke at 5 in the morning. The first question I asked myself was the same every day. What good shall I do this day? Not what will I post, not who will see me, not how I will look. What good will I actually do? Then I spent hours studying and planning before most people were awake. That was my power time. My silent time. The time I invested in becoming someone capable of doing good. At night, before sleep, I asked a second question. What good have I done today? And I reviewed honestly. Not what did I appear to do, but what did I actually accomplish? What did I learn? Where did I grow? Where did I fall short? This practice, this daily cycle of intention and reflection, all of it happening in private, built my character. This created the discipline that allowed everything else. And I tracked my virtues. Temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, humility. 13 virtues I wanted to embody. I didn't post about them. I didn't announce my virtue project. I just tracked them privately, focused on one each week, noting when I failed, celebrating when I succeeded. Only I saw this. Only I knew. This private practice transformed me. Not perfectly. I remained flawed as all humans are, but it made me better, stronger, more capable, and nobody knew I was doing it. They just eventually noticed that I seemed to make good decisions, seemed to have unusual discipline, seemed to accomplish things others found difficult. They saw the results of what I'd built in silence. That's how it works. The private work creates public results. But if you skip the private work and just try to create the appearance of results, you build nothing real. You create a facade that will crumble the moment real pressure is applied. Now let me tell you something about the silence itself. There's power in not speaking, power in not announcing, power in keeping your goals and dreams and plans to yourself while you work on them. When you announce a goal, you get a little hit of satisfaction from people's reactions. Your brain treats that announcement like a partial accomplishment. You feel good, you feel validated, and it actually reduces your motivation to do the actual work. I've seen this countless times. Someone announces they're going to write a book, start a business, or learn a skill. Everyone says how wonderful that is. The person feels accomplished. And then they never actually do it, because they already got the reward they were seeking, which was the validation and approval. But when you keep your goal silent, keep it between you and the work itself, you maintain the tension. You maintain the hunger. There's no release until you actually accomplish the thing. And that tension, uncomfortable as it is, that's what drives you forward. That's what gets you up early and keeps you practicing late. I had plans for years that nobody knew about. Civic improvements I wanted to make, institutions I wanted to create, discoveries I wanted to pursue. I didn't talk about them. I just worked on them. And when they were ready, when they were real, then I brought them into the world. The library, the fire department, the hospital, the university. These weren't announced as dreams. They were presented as realities I'd already built through silent, steady effort. This is how you create things that last. You protect them in their fragile early stages by keeping them private. You give them space to grow, without the pressure of others' expectations or doubts. You nurture them in silence until they're strong enough to withstand public scrutiny. Then you offer them to the world. Your dreams deserve that protection. Your goals deserve that space. Your transformation deserves that privacy. Don't expose them too early. Don't seek validation before you've done the work. Trust the process. Trust the silence. Trust that if you build something real in private, the world will eventually see and respond to what you've created. And here's something beautiful about working in silence. It reveals your true motivation. If you can only do something when people are watching, then you're not motivated by the thing itself. You're motivated by the attention. But if you can show up day after day, do the work, make the effort, all without anyone knowing or caring, then you've found something real. You've found genuine motivation, genuine passion, genuine commitment. This is the test. Can you practice your craft when nobody's watching? Can you maintain your integrity when you could lie and never be caught? Can you do the right thing when the easier wrong thing is available and nobody would know the difference? If you can, you're building real character. If you can't, you're just performing character, and that performance will eventually fail you. I negotiated treaties that shaped nations. But the skills that allowed me to do that, I developed in hundreds of conversations nobody ever heard. I wrote proposals that changed laws. But the writing skill that made that possible, I developed in thousands of pages nobody ever read. I invented things that improved lives. But the thinking that enabled invention, I cultivated in countless hours of private contemplation and study. Everything that mattered happened in silence first. Everything. And then, only after it was built, only after it was real, did it enter the public sphere. The world didn't see my electrical experiments until I'd already shocked myself unconscious twice. The public didn't read Poor Richard's wisdom until I'd filled 17 notebooks with terrible attempts at wit. Nobody witnessed the 100 nights I sat calculating routes for the postal system, moving imaginary letters across imaginary maps by candlelight. This is how mastery actually happens. Not in the spotlight, in the silence. Your generation has been sold a fundamentally backwards model. You've been taught that visibility equals validity. That if you're not streaming your progress, posting your process, building your audience while you build your skill, then somehow you're doing it wrong. You're falling behind. You're missing out on the exponential power of community and accountability. Let me tell you what you're actually missing out on. depth. Real skill development happens in a state of complete absorption, not partial attention, not one eye on the work and one eye on how the work appears to others. Total immersion. And you cannot achieve that state when you're performing your learning for an audience. I learned typesetting in my brother's shop. No one was watching. No one was grading. No one was commenting. It was just me, metal letters, ink-stained fingers, and the unforgiving truth of whether the words lined up or they didn't, whether the pressure was right or not, whether I'd calculated the spacing correctly or I'd wasted an entire page. That feedback loop, direct, immediate, undiluted by opinion, that's where competence is forged. When you document everything, when you perform your process, something insidious happens. You begin optimizing for the wrong outcome. You start asking, how does this look? Instead of, does this work? You chase the appearance of progress rather than progress itself. I see it everywhere now. People learning in public who aren't actually learning, they're narrating. They're so busy explaining what they're doing that they never sink into actually doing it. The documentation becomes the product. The performance becomes the practice. And the cruelest part? They don't even realize the trade they've made. I watched this trade happen in real time with a young entrepreneur I once mentored. Brilliant mind. Built a startup from nothing. Turned it into something the market actually wanted. But then the invitations started arriving. Speaking engagements, podcast interviews, conference panels where he'd sit beside people who'd accomplished far less but talked far better. At first, he treated these as obligations, necessary evils to build the brand, attract investors, and grow the company. But I watched the shift happen. Slowly. Then suddenly, he began scheduling building time around media appearances. Then, he started scheduling media appearances around other media appearances. The laptop that once lived in his workshop moved to green rooms and hotel lobbies. He'd show up to our meetings with talking points instead of prototypes. His sentences became smoother, more polished, and emptier. I'm playing the game, he told me. You have to be visible to matter. 6 months later, his company pivoted. Not because the market demanded it, but because the new direction made for better storytelling. Made him more bookable, fit the narrative arc that audiences wanted to hear. The thing he'd been building, the actual innovation, got shelved. Too technical, too nuanced. Didn't translate well to a 10-minute segment. He'd optimized for applause. And the applause came. Standing ovations at conferences. Verified checkmarks. Feature articles. But the company? It dissolved into the same mediocrity as 1,000 others. A great story about nothing that mattered. This is what I mean by the performance becoming the practice. He didn't consciously decide to abandon substance for style. He just kept saying yes to the stage. And the stage is seductive. It tells you that you matter, that you're important, that your voice needs to be heard. But here's what the stage never tells you. Every hour you spend performing is an hour you're not building. Every standing ovation is feedback from people who'll forget your name by morning. Every viral moment is a dopamine hit that rewires your brain to seek the next one instead of seeking the truth. The greatest minds in history weren't performers. They were builders who occasionally shared what they built. Newton didn't tour England explaining gravity. He discovered it, documented it, and moved on to the next problem. Darwin didn't create a speaking circuit about natural selection. He spent decades in silence, gathering evidence, wrestling with implications that would outlive every critic who tried to make a name attacking him. You know what's fascinating? I can trace this pattern across centuries. The people whose work genuinely changed civilization, Maxwell with electromagnetism, Pasteur with germ theory, Shannon with information theory, they all shared one characteristic. They were practically invisible during their most important work. Not because they were hiding, but because they were times too busy building times to worry about being seen. Now look at today's landscape. The people with the biggest audiences are rarely the people doing the most important work. They're the people best at times appearing times to do important work. They've mastered the aesthetic of insight without the substance. They've learned to simulate depth through production value and confidence. And here's what breaks my heart: many of them started genuinely. They had real insights, valuable knowledge, and authentic curiosity. But the algorithm doesn't reward finished work. It rewards constant times work. So they never finish anything. They're trapped in an eternal present tense, always producing, never completing, building audiences instead of building legacies. You want to know the real cost? It's not just your time or your focus. It's your time's discernment asterisk. When you spend years optimizing for engagement, you lose the ability to distinguish between what matters and what performs. Your taste becomes corrupted. You start genuinely believing that the thing that got the most likes was actually your best work. You begin to trust the crowd's judgment more than your own. I've watched brilliant people who could have genuinely advanced their fields, turn into content machines. And the tragedy isn't that they failed. It's that they succeeded times at the wrong thing asterisk. Because here's what nobody tells you about becoming a content machine. You don't notice it happening. It's like erosion. One video at a time, you're wearing away the bedrock of why you started. You tell yourself, this is just temporary. Once I build the audience, asterisk then times I'll do the deep work. But that day never comes. Because by the time you have the audience, you're terrified of losing them. You've built a prison out of expectations, and you're both the architect and the inmate. I see creators who started with genuine curiosity about, say, astrophysics. Their early videos were rough but fascinating real attempts to grapple with complex ideas. Fast forward 2 years, and they're doing reaction videos to other people's space content. Not because they love reactions, but because the algorithm smiled once, and they've been chasing that high ever since. The craft atrophies, the curiosity dies, and what remains is a very efficient content factory, producing increasingly hollow products. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. Asterisk. It works asterisk. These creators often become more successful by conventional metrics. More views, more subscribers, more sponsorships. The market rewards the pivot away from depth, and that creates a survivor bias that's absolutely poisonous for newcomers. New creators look at who's succeeding and think, I guess that's what good looks like. They never see the cemetery of abandoned craft. They don't hear the private confessions of creators who've built audiences they resent, who feel trapped performing a version of themselves they've grown to despise. I met a creator last year, won't name them, who told me they'd made enough money to never worry again. Should have been celebrating. Instead, they looked exhausted. I've forgotten what I actually think about anything, they said. I only know what my audience wants me to think. That sentence haunts me. Imagine having a platform, having influence, having resources, and losing your own intellectual autonomy in the process. Trading your internal compass for external validation, one video at a time, until you can't find your way back. Asterisk, asterisk. Some of you might be thinking, but Benjamin, aren't you being dramatic? It's just entertainment. It's just content. People are making money, building careers, living their dreams. Asterisk, asterisk. And you know what? Fair question. Let me address it head on. Because here's what I've observed across 3 centuries of human behavior, from the printing press to the algorithm. Asterisk, asterisk, the medium always matters more than we think it does. Asterisk, asterisk. The printing press didn't just make books cheaper. It fundamentally changed how humans thought, how knowledge spread, how revolutions began. The telegraph didn't just speed up messages, it collapsed distance and time in ways that rewired human expectations. And YouTube? YouTube isn't just a video platform. Asterisk, asterisk. It's a psychological architecture that's redesigning human attention, ambition, and identity at a scale we're only beginning to comprehend. Asterisk, asterisk. When I see creators defending the culture with, it's just entertainment, I see something I witnessed constantly in my own era. Asterisk, asterisk. People mistaking the familiar for the harmless asterisk. Asterisk. In the 1700s, people said gambling houses were just entertainment. Taverns were just socializing. Public executions were just justice. And you know what? They were right on the surface. But beneath that surface, these institutions were shaping values, normalizing behaviors, creating addictions, and structuring entire communities around them. Asterisk, asterisk. YouTube works the same way. Asterisk, asterisk. It presents itself as neutral, a tool, a platform, just a way to share videos. But every feature, every algorithm tweak, every metric displayed on your dashboard is asterisk, asterisk, actively teaching you what to value asterisk, asterisk. It's not passive. It's not neutral. It's a pedagogy, a system of instruction that's remarkably effective at training millions of creators to think, behave, and create in very specific ways. And here's the insidious part. Asterisk asterisk, it teaches through reward, not force. Asterisk asterisk. Nobody's holding a gun to your head saying, chase trends or else. Instead, they're showing you numbers that spike when you do certain things. They're introducing you to other creators who've made it by following the pattern. They're creating an entire economy where conformity is literally profitable and deviation is financially punished. Asterisk asterisk. That's not entertainment. That's conditioning. Asterisk asterisk. And the most insidious part? They've convinced us that this is what we times want, asterisk. That this is progress. That being constantly surveilled, constantly judged, and constantly ranked is somehow liberating. They call it engagement. They call it building community. But what they've actually built is a digital panopticon where we're both the prisoners and the guards, watching each other to make sure nobody steps out of line. I watch young creators, talented, original people slowly sand down their edges because the algorithm doesn't reward sharp corners. They start with something unique, something that could only come from them, and then they watch the analytics. They see what performs. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, they start morphing into whatever the system rewards. A comedian becomes less edgy. A musician simplifies their sound. A filmmaker shortens their vision to fit the platform's preferred length, not because someone told them to, not because an executive gave them notes, but because the feedback loop is so immediate, so constant, so seductive. Every video that doesn't perform feels like personal rejection. Every algorithmic failure feels like proof that you're doing something wrong. This is the genius of the system. It doesn't need censors or gatekeepers because it outsourced that job to mathematics. The algorithm doesn't have to explain itself. It doesn't have to justify its decisions. It just is this invisible, omnipresent force that determines your worth, your reach, your very ability to be heard. And because we can't see it, can't understand it, can't argue with it, we assume it must be objective, fair, inevitable, but it's not. These systems were designed by people with specific goals, specific biases, and specific economic incentives. Every recommendation is a choice. Every suppression is a decision. Every neutral ranking is actually a value judgment disguised as mathematics. We've been sold the myth of algorithmic objectivity, and we bought it completely. The algorithm doesn't promote the best content. It promotes the content that best serves the platform's business model. And the platform's business model is keeping you scrolling, clicking, watching, and coming back for more. Not enriching your life. Not expanding your horizons. Not challenging your assumptions. Just more. More engagement. More retention. More data to sell. They've turned your attention into their commodity. Every scroll, every pause, every double tap, it's all inventory, in their warehouse. And the most profitable inventory? The kind that keeps you angry, afraid, or envious. Because those emotions, they don't let you close the app. Think about it. When was the last time you saw a genuinely calm, nuanced post go viral? When did a thoughtful, measured take on a complex issue get millions of shares? It doesn't. But rage? Outrage? Scandal? That spreads like wildfire through dry timber. The algorithms have learned something dark about human nature, something I observed in the coffee houses and taverns of Philadelphia, but never at this scale. We're drawn to conflict. We crane our necks at accidents. We gather around fights in the street. But here's what's different now. In my time, that impulse was limited by geography and time. You couldn't spend 12 hours a day watching people argue. You'd eventually have to go home, tend your shop, and talk to your family. Now, the argument never ends. The outrage is infinite. There's always another scandal, another villain, another reason to feel that spike of righteous anger. And every time you feel it, every time your blood pressure rises and you tap that share button, you're making someone in Silicon Valley very, very wealthy. They call it engagement. I call it exploitation. The platform doesn't care if the content is true. It doesn't care if it's fair. It doesn't care if it's tearing apart the social fabric of your democracy. It cares about one metric. Did you stay? Did you watch? Did you react? Because reaction equals revenue. I published Poor Richard's Almanac for 25 years. You know what I never did? Deliberately print lies to increase circulation. I never fabricated scandals about my competitors to sell more copies. There was still honor in the marketplace of ideas. But these platforms? They've discovered they can monetize dishonor. They can profit from polarization. They can build empires on the erosion of truth itself. And here's the cruelest trick. They've convinced you that you're in control, that you're choosing what to see, that your feed reflects your interests. It doesn't. It reflects their interests. And their interest is keeping you on that platform by any means necessary. Because that's how they make their money. Every second you spend scrolling is a second they can sell to advertisers. Every notification that pulls you back in is another opportunity to serve you an ad. Every algorithm tweak that makes the feed just a little more addictive is another percentage point on their quarterly earnings report. And here's what really gets me. They've gotten so good at this that they don't even need to know you personally. They just need data. Lots and lots of data. They know that if you watched a video about fitness for more than 30 seconds, you're probably interested in weight loss products. They know that if you liked 3 posts about relationships in a row, you're probably going through something emotional and vulnerable to self-help content. They know that late-night scrolling means you're tired, and tired people make impulsive decisions. Perfect time to show you that thing you've been thinking about buying. It's not magic, it's mathematics. Cold, calculated, ruthlessly efficient mathematics designed to extract maximum value from your attention. And the worst part? We volunteered for this. We signed up willingly. We clicked "I agree" on terms and conditions we never read, giving away our digital lives in exchange for what? The ability to see what our high school classmates are eating for lunch? I'm not saying social media is evil. I'm saying it's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used wisely or it can be misused. Right now, most of us are letting it use us instead of the other way around. Think about your own experience. How many times have you picked up your phone with a specific purpose? Maybe to check the weather or send a quick message, and 30 minutes later, you're deep in a comment section arguing with strangers about something you didn't even care about 5 minutes ago? That's not an accident. That's design. The algorithms know your emotional triggers better than you know them yourself. They've analyzed millions of data points about you: what makes you pause mid-scroll, what makes your pupils dilate, what keeps your finger from swiping away. They know that outrage keeps you engaged longer than joy. They know that fear spreads faster than hope. They know that comparison generates more clicks than contentment. And here's what really troubles me. We've become complicit in our own manipulation. We know we're being played, yet we keep playing. It's like watching someone slowly poison themselves while fully aware of what's in the glass. The difference is, this poison tastes sweet. It delivers little dopamine hits that feel like connection, validation, and importance. But what are we actually getting? Think about the last time you spent an hour on social media. What do you have to show for it? Can you remember 3 things you learned? Did any interaction deepen a meaningful relationship? Or did you just feel, busy, stimulated? Yes, but nourished? Fulfilled? I spent 20 years as a printer, understanding that what we reproduce and distribute shapes minds and societies. But at least with printed words, there was friction, the cost of paper, the time to read, the physical act of seeking out information. Now information seeks us out, customized to exploit our weaknesses. We're not reading the news. We're being fed an algorithmic slurry designed specifically for our consumption patterns. And the cruelest irony? We're lonelier than ever. We have 1,000 friends, but no one to call at 3 in the morning. We share our lives but hide our struggles. We perform connection while experiencing isolation. And perhaps most dangerously, we've begun to mistake documentation for living. We record moments instead of inhabiting them. The concert seen through a screen. The meal was photographed before it was tasted. The sunset was captured but not witnessed. We curate evidence of experiences, while the experiences themselves slip through our fingers like water. I watch people at gatherings, and I see it everywhere. The phone emerges at every pause in conversation. The compulsion to check, to scroll, to see what we're missing while we're missing what's right in front of us. We're present in body but absent in mind, our attention fractured across a dozen digital spaces while occupying none of them fully. The tragedy is that we know this. Deep down, we feel the hollowness of it. We sense the manipulation, recognize the addiction, and understand the cost. Yet we return, day after day, scroll after scroll, because the alternative feels impossible. To disconnect is to disappear. To step away is to be forgotten. We're trapped in a system that profits from our compulsion and calls it connection. And the algorithm knows this. Oh, it knows this better than we know ourselves. It has mapped our vulnerabilities with inhuman precision. It knows exactly when we're lonely, when we're bored, when we're seeking validation. It knows which images will make us pause, which headlines will make us click, and which outrage will keep us engaged. It feeds us content designed not to inform or enlighten, but to trigger and retain. We are not the customers of social media. We are the product. Our attention is harvested, packaged, and sold. Our data is mined, analyzed, and weaponized. Our psychology is studied not to help us flourish, but to keep us scrolling. And we consent to this, mindlessly clicking agree to terms we never read, trading our privacy and autonomy for the privilege of participation. The platforms speak of community while engineering isolation. They promise connection while designing addiction. They claim to bring the world together while their algorithms divide us into ever smaller tribes of outrage and confirmation bias. They are not neutral tools. They are sophisticated behavior modification systems, and we are the subjects of a grand experiment in social control. And what experiment, you might ask, yields such results? Let me illuminate the harvest they reap from our digital behavior. Every click you make, every pause in your scrolling, every video you watch to completion, these are not private moments. They are data points in an enormous surveillance apparatus that would make King George's spies blush with inadequacy. The founders fought against writs of assistance and general warrants that allowed British soldiers to search homes without a specific cause. Today, we've invited far more invasive surveillance into our pockets voluntarily, wrapped in the seductive package of convenience and connectivity. These platforms know you better than you know yourself. They know when you're sad, when you're vulnerable, when you're most susceptible to persuasion. They know your fears before you articulate them, your desires before you acknowledge them. This knowledge is not gathered for your benefit, it is weaponized to extract your attention, your time, your money, and ultimately your autonomy. I spent years studying human nature, cataloging virtues and vices in my pursuit of moral perfection. I failed, as all humans must, but the exercise taught me that self-knowledge requires honest reflection. These platforms short-circuit that reflection. They tell you who you are, based on your past behavior, then trap you in that identity, by showing you only what confirms it. If their algorithm decides you're interested in conspiracy theories, you'll be flooded with increasingly extreme content until the reasonable center disappears entirely from your view. The business model is elegance itself from their perspective and poison from ours. They've discovered that outrage keeps eyes on screens longer than contentment. Fear spreads faster than hope. Conspiracy theories generate more engagement than truth. And so the algorithm, that supposedly neutral arbiter, actively promotes the most divisive, the most inflammatory, the most extreme content, because that is what serves their financial interests. I watch as moderate voices, reasonable perspectives, nuanced thinking, the very foundation of democratic discourse, are systematically buried by the algorithm, not because they are wrong, but because they are boring. They do not trigger the emotional response that keeps fingers scrolling, eyes glued, and advertisements viewed. The result is a populace that no longer shares a common reality. You have your news sources, carefully curated to confirm what you already believe. Your neighbor has theirs, equally curated, equally confirming, and between you lies not merely disagreement, but an unbridgeable chasm of fundamentally incompatible worldviews. In my time, we argued fiercely about the structure of government, about representation, about the very nature of liberty itself. But we argued from a shared foundation of facts. We might interpret them differently, prioritize them differently, but we could at least agree on what had actually occurred. Today, you cannot even agree on whether an event happened. Was the election stolen? Depending on which algorithmic bubble you inhabit, you live in entirely different universes. One where democracy was subverted, another where it was protected. And never shall these universes meet, because the algorithm profits from keeping them separate. This is the information age, yes, but information without context is propaganda. Information without verification is a rumor. And information selected specifically to enrage you is manipulation. I wrote that an informed citizenry is the only true guardian of democracy. But what happens when the citizenry is not informed but programmed? When their information comes not from diverse sources critically evaluated, but from a single algorithm designed to maximize their emotional engagement? You get what you have now. Tribalism masquerading as politics, echo chambers masquerading as communities, and the slow, inexorable death of the common ground necessary for any republic to function. The founders of these platforms will tell you they are merely neutral hosts, that they bear no responsibility for the content users choose to share. This is a lie more audacious than any I encountered in my 3 centuries. They have built the most powerful behavioral modification tools in human history, and they deploy them every moment of every day for profit. I watched as these platforms refine their methods with each passing year. They discovered that anger spreads faster than joy, that fear travels farther than hope, that outrage generates more engagement than understanding, and so they adjusted their invisible machinery accordingly. The algorithms learned to prioritize conflict over consensus, sensation over substance, tribal loyalty over truth. You must understand this was not accidental. Every feature was tested, measured, and optimized. They studied how long you lingered on each type of content. They measured your pupil dilation, your scroll speed, and your likelihood to share. They B tested different emotional triggers, like I once tested different compositions of printing ink. But where my experiments aimed to spread knowledge more efficiently, theirs aimed to capture attention more completely. The like button, such an innocent name for a tool of psychological manipulation. Its creator would later express regret, but by then, billions of humans had been conditioned to seek its validation. I watched people refresh their screens compulsively, waiting for the dopamine reward of approval from strangers. I saw teenagers whose self-worth became quantified in hearts and thumbs, whose days were ruined by insufficient engagement on their carefully curated images. The infinite scroll, another marvel of addictive design. In my time, when you reached the bottom of a page, you had a natural stopping point. Now, the content flows endlessly, each swipe promising something more interesting, more shocking, more essential, just below. There is always one more thing to see, one more notification to check, one more threat or opportunity you might miss if you dare to look away. And the notifications, those little red badges that create artificial urgency where none exists. They hijack your brain's threat detection system, convincing you that a stranger's comment on your photograph is as urgent as a knock on your door or a cry for help. I watch you reach for your device the moment it vibrates, interrupting conversations, meals, and even moments of intimacy with those you claim to love most. Your forebears once feared missing the morning post or the evening news bulletin, but they received correspondence perhaps once a day, news perhaps twice. You've engineered a world where you can miss something every single second, and you've convinced yourselves this is progress. I observe young people, teenagers, and even children who cannot sit through a meal without checking their devices multiple times. They cannot watch a sunset without photographing it. They cannot experience a concert without recording it. They're so busy documenting their lives that they forget to live them. And the cruelest irony? Those photographs and recordings sit unwatched in digital archives, never to be revisited, serving only to have stolen the present moment when they were created. In my time, we understood something fundamental. Boredom is not the enemy of the human mind. It is its fuel. The greatest ideas emerge, not from constant stimulation but from quiet contemplation. Isaac Newton formulated his theories during a plague when he had nothing but time and silence. Mozart heard entire symphonies in his mind during long, unstimulated walks. You've eliminated boredom. Every potential moment of stillness gets filled with scrolling, swiping, and refreshing. You wait for a lift, you check your phone. You stand in line, you check your phone. You use the privy. And yes, I know this disgusts. Even you check your phone. Your minds never rest. They never wander. And a mind that never wanders discovers the connections between disparate ideas, the sudden insights that change everything. These come from the unconscious mind, which needs space to work. You've given it no space at all. I watch creativity dying in real time. Where once people would sketch, write, tinker, or simply daydream, they now consume, endlessly consume. You're a generation of audiences who've forgotten how to be performers, readers who've forgotten how to be writers, listeners who've forgotten how to be musicians. And I wonder, when you close those glowing rectangles, what remains? What resides in you that wasn't placed there by someone else's algorithm, someone else's advertisement, someone else's carefully manufactured outrage? I watch as skills that once defined human competence wither like unwatered gardens. Navigation, that ancient art of reading stars. Landmarks. The angle of afternoon sun replaced by a voice that tells you when to turn. Spelling and grammar, once the marks of an educated mind, are now outsourced to software that corrects before you've even finished thinking. Mental arithmetic, memory of phone numbers, the ability to read a physical map, even the simple skill of sustained attention all atrophying, year by year, finger swipe by finger swipe. You call it convenience. I call it dependency. There's a particular tragedy in watching human memory itself become externalized. You don't remember your friends' birthdays, Facebook reminds you. You don't remember how to get to places you've driven 100 times, you still check your GPS. You don't commit poems, recipes, or important facts to memory because I can just look it up. But memory isn't merely storage, my friends. It's the foundation of identity itself. We are what we remember. Our thoughts are built from what we've internalized, not from what we can retrieve from a search engine. A person who remembers nothing, who externalizes all knowledge to devices, becomes in some essential way less of a person, more of an empty vessel through which information temporarily flows. I built my memory palaces deliberately. I copied passages from books by hand, not because printing presses didn't exist, but because the act of copying engraved knowledge into my mind. I practiced mathematics not because I lacked calculating devices, but because I wanted those capabilities within me, part of my mental architecture. You've traded capability for convenience, and with it, you've traded a portion of your very selves. Let me tell you about tools versus crutches, because there's a distinction you must understand. When I invented the lightning rod, it didn't make people weaker, it made buildings safer. When I improved the Franklin stove, it didn't diminish anyone's ability to think, it kept families warm while using less fuel. These were tools that freed people from danger and drudgery, giving them time and safety to pursue higher purposes. But what you've created is different. You've built technologies that don't free your minds, they replace them. When I used a compass, I still had to understand navigation, read the stars, and calculate distances. The compass was an aid, not a substitute. When you use your GPS, you surrender the entire process. You don't learn the route, don't observe landmarks, don't build that internal map that comes from genuine navigation. Turn off that device, and you're lost in your own neighborhood. This is what I mean by atrophy. Every time you reach for that phone to remember a number, to spell a word, to calculate a tip, to recall a fact, you're choosing not to exercise a mental muscle. And like any muscle, what you don't use, you lose. I watched this principle in my own time with simple arithmetic. Those who used their minds for calculations could perform complex mathematics mentally. Those who relied entirely on paper and pen found their mental capabilities diminishing. But your generation has taken this to extraordinary extremes. You've outsourced not just calculation but memory itself. Not just navigation but spatial awareness. Not just writing but thinking. I've watched young people stare at essay prompts and immediately reach for AI to help them brainstorm. They never sit with the discomfort of original thought, never wrestle with ideas until understanding emerges. They want the product without the process, never realizing the process is where the actual learning happens. I once wrote, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, but that investment requires you to do the actual work of learning. You can't outsource understanding. You can't delegate wisdom. When you use AI to bypass the struggle of formation, whether that's forming sentences, forming arguments, or forming original thoughts, you're not just cheating an assignment. You're cheating yourself out of becoming someone capable of independent thinking. And here's what truly worries me. Entire generations are growing up without ever experiencing the full arc of intellectual struggle and breakthrough. They'll never know that incredible moment when, after hours of wrestling with a problem, the solution suddenly crystallizes in their mind. They'll never experience the pride of looking at something they created entirely from their own cognitive labor. They're being trained to be dependent, to always need an external intelligence to complete their thoughts. The companies building these tools understand this perfectly. They're not stupid. They know that the more dependent you become on AI for basic cognitive functions, the more valuable their products become. It's the same principle tobacco companies used: get them hooked young and you have customers for life. Except instead of addicting you to nicotine, they're addicting you to offloaded thinking. I see this dependency forming in real time. Students who once could write a coherent paragraph now struggle to compose an email without AI assistance. Young professionals who panic when they can't access ChatGPT to draft a memo. People who've forgotten how to sit with their own thoughts long enough to develop an original idea. This isn't progress. This is atrophy dressed up in the language of productivity. And the tragic irony? The skills being lost are precisely the ones that will matter most in an AI-saturated world. When everyone has access to the same generative tools, what will differentiate you isn't your ability to prompt an AI. It's your ability to think critically about what it produces, to synthesize information in novel ways, to bring genuine human insight that no machine can replicate. Yet, here's what troubles me most. In automating the learning process, we're not just losing skills. We're losing something far more fundamental. We're losing the struggle. And the struggle, dear friend, is where all real growth occurs. I learned this not in a classroom, but in a print shop. At 12 years old, standing over hot type, my fingers stained with ink, I set each letter by hand. It was tedious. It was difficult. My father thought it beneath me. He wanted me to be a minister. But in that struggle, something extraordinary happened. When you must physically arrange each letter, you become intimately acquainted with language. You notice patterns. You see how words are constructed, how sentences flow, how arguments build. You can't skim, you must engage with every single character. The difficulty forced a depth of processing that easy reading never would. This is what psychologists now call desirable difficulty. The counterintuitive truth that making learning harder in specific ways makes it more effective. When students must retrieve information from memory rather than simply rereading it, they learn better. When they must struggle to solve a problem before being shown the solution, they understand more deeply. When they must write by hand rather than type, they retain more. The struggle isn't a bug in the learning process, it's the core feature. It's the resistance that builds intellectual muscle. Remove it, and you don't make learning more efficient, you make it hollow. Yet, AI promises to eliminate precisely this productive struggle. Why wrestle with a difficult concept when ChatGPT can explain it simply? Why labor over finding the right word when AI can generate eloquent prose instantly? Why struggle through a proof when an algorithm can solve it? I'll tell you why. Because in that wrestling, that laboring, that struggling, your brain is building neural pathways that automated solutions cannot create. You're developing resilience, pattern recognition, and creative problem solving. You're learning not just the answer, but how to arrive at answers, a meta skill that transfers across domains. When students bypass this struggle, they're not saving time, they're mortgaging their future cognitive capabilities for present convenience. And here's what truly concerns me. They don't even realize what they've lost until it's too late. The student who used AI to write every essay in college sits in their first real job, staring at a blank document, expected to produce original analysis. The mental muscles required for that task were never developed. They've atrophied before they even had a chance to grow. I've watched this play out in focus groups, in interviews with recent graduates. There's a moment of panic when they realize the AI training wheels are gone, or worse, that using them in professional settings carries consequences. I don't know how to start, they tell me. I don't know what I think until I see what the AI generates first. That last confession should send chills down your spine. They've externalized their own thought process. The internal dialogue that should happen in your mind, considering options, weighing evidence, forming tentative conclusions, now happens in a chat box. The AI has become a cognitive prosthetic for a limb that was never broken, and now the organic limb has weakened from disuse. Let me be clear. I'm not romanticizing struggle for its own sake. There's no virtue in unnecessary hardship. If there's a genuinely better tool that enhances learning rather than replacing it, use it. I used libraries, mentors, collaborative study, every resource available. The question isn't whether to use tools, but whether the tool develops your capacity or diminishes it. The tragedy is that many students don't even enjoy the supposed benefits they're sacrificing their development for. They use AI to rush through an assignment, then spend the saved time scrolling social media or gaming, not on something meaningful, but on equally empty digital consumption. They've traded intellectual growth for what, exactly? A few extra hours of dopamine hits that leave no lasting value? And here's what truly breaks my heart: they don't even realize what they're losing until it's already gone. The capacity for sustained thought atrophies like an unused muscle. The ability to sit with complex ideas, to turn them over in your mind like examining a gemstone from different angles, to connect disparate concepts into something new and meaningful. These skills aren't just diminishing, they're being systematically destroyed by a culture that measures everything in clicks, views, and seconds of engagement. I remember the countless hours I spent in my printing shop, Setting type letter by letter. Tedious work. Yes, but it gave me time to think. To really think. Each pamphlet I printed, I'd read and reread, letting the ideas permeate my consciousness. I'd argue with the authors in my head, find flaws in their logic, and discover connections they'd missed. That kind of deep processing is how wisdom develops. It's how you transform information into understanding, and understanding into wisdom. Your generation has more information at its fingertips than I could have imagined in my wildest dreams, but information without contemplation is just noise. It's the mental equivalent of eating constantly without ever digesting you're consuming, yes, but you're not nourishing yourself, you're not growing. And the tragedy compounds because the most intelligent among you are often the most susceptible to this trap. The brightest minds, the ones who should be pushing humanity forward, solving our most pressing problems, creating beauty and meaning, they're the ones most seduced by endless optimization, by the promise that if they just find the right productivity system, the right app, the right morning routine, everything will fall into place. But here's a truth that took me decades to fully grasp. Productivity without purpose is just exhaustion with extra steps. You want to know what I discovered during those years when I was juggling a dozen projects simultaneously? The times when I genuinely moved the needle on things that mattered weren't the days I checked off the most tasks. They were the days when I dared to say no to almost everything so I could say yes to the one thing that actually required my full presence. There's this phenomenon I've watched unfold in your digital age that would have been incomprehensible to me back in Philadelphia. You have people, smart, capable people who can tell you about every productivity methodology ever devised. They know GTD, backwards and forwards. They've mastered the Pomodoro technique. They've got their second brain perfectly organized. They can debate the merits of various note-taking systems with theological fervor. And yet, somehow, despite all this optimization, they're producing less meaningful work than people who've never heard of any of these systems. Why? Because they've fallen into the trap of treating productivity as the goal rather than the tool. They've become so obsessed with the mechanics of doing that, they've forgotten to ask whether what they're doing is worth the effort in the first place. It's like becoming so focused on sharpening your axe that you never actually cut down any trees. I learned this lesson the hard way with Poor Richard's Almanac. The first year, I spent countless hours perfecting my systems for gathering weather data, organizing proverbs, and planning layouts. I was so proud of my processes, and you know what? That first edition was mediocre at best. It wasn't until I stopped worrying so much about my systems and started focusing on whether the content would actually help a farmer plan his planting season or make a merchant laugh over breakfast that the almanac became something people genuinely valued. Here's what nobody tells you about us. Historical figures you hold up as paragons of productivity. We failed constantly. We wasted time. We pursued dead ends. I spent months on experiments that went nowhere. I invested in business ventures that collapsed. I championed political positions I later realized were wrong. But here's what those failures taught me. They taught me when to pivot. They taught me the difference between persistence and stubbornness. They taught me that the strongest timber weathers the harshest storms, but even the strongest tree must bend in the wind or it will break. There's a particular kind of wisdom that only comes from being wrong. When you've invested everything in an idea, when you've defended it publicly, when you've staked your reputation on it, and then you discover you were mistaken, that's when you learn what character really means. I remember a business partnership that went sour. I'd vouched for this man, invested my own money, and encouraged others to do the same, and he turned out to be less than honest. The financial loss stung, certainly. But what hurt more was facing the people I'd encouraged to invest, looking them in the eye and saying, I was wrong about him. I'm sorry. But you know what happened? Most of them respected me more afterward, not less, because they'd seen me take responsibility. They'd seen me own my mistake instead of making excuses or blaming circumstances. That's a pattern I've noticed throughout history. The leaders we remember most fondly aren't the ones who were always right. They're the ones who were honest when they were wrong, who learned, who adjusted, who grew. Think about the people you trust most in your own life. Are they the ones who never make mistakes? Or are they the ones who admit when they do, who doesn't pretend to have all the answers, who show you their humanity instead of hiding behind a facade of infallibility? The truth is, we trust people who are real more than we trust perfect people. Because perfect isn't real. Perfect is a mask. And we all know what masks are for, hiding what's underneath. So I stopped trying to be perfect. I stopped pretending I had everything figured out. Instead, I got comfortable saying 3 of the most powerful words in any language: I don't know. And 3 more: I was wrong. Those 6 words? They've opened more doors for me than any display of confidence ever did. They made me approachable. They made people want to share their knowledge with me. They created space for real conversation instead of competitive posturing. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more comfortable I became with admitting my limitations, the more people trusted my judgment. Because they knew that when I did claim to know something, I actually knew it. My credibility came from my honesty, not from pretending to be an expert on everything. Think about it from a practical standpoint. When you constantly pretend to know things you don't, you have to maintain an elaborate facade. You have to remember what you claim to know, avoid situations where you might be exposed, and live in constant fear of being found out. It's exhausting. It's like juggling while walking a tightrope. Eventually, something's going to fall. But when you're honest about your knowledge gaps, you free yourself from that burden. You can ask questions without shame. You can learn openly. You can change your mind when presented with new information, without being accused of inconsistency. You become intellectually agile instead of defensively rigid. I saw this play out beautifully in the development of the lightning rod. When I first proposed the idea, I didn't claim to have all the answers. I presented my hypothesis and my experiments, but I was clear about what remained unknown. I invited others to test, challenge, and improve upon my work. And you know what happened? People did exactly that. Scientists across Europe conducted their own experiments, refined the design, and helped establish the principles more firmly than I ever could have alone. If I had positioned myself as the sole authority who knew everything about electricity, I would have stifled that collaborative spirit. People would have either rejected my ideas outright or accepted them without questioning, neither of which advances knowledge. The same principle applies to any field. The best leaders aren't those who pretend to have all the answers. They're the ones who create environments where people feel safe admitting what they don't know, where questions are encouraged, and where learning is celebrated. In the Constitutional Convention, some of the most productive moments came when someone dared to say, "I don't understand how this would work in practice," or "I see a potential problem here that I can't solve." Those admissions opened the door for collaborative problem solving. They allowed us to address weaknesses before they became catastrophic flaws. Contrast that with the delegates who dug in defensively, unwilling to admit any limitation in their proposals. They became obstacles rather than contributors. Their pride became a barrier to progress. The most damaging form of certainty, though, was not intellectual, it was ideological. Some men arrived at the convention with such fixed worldviews that they could not see the wisdom in any proposal that didn't align with their preconceptions. They had built entire philosophical systems in their minds, and any challenge to one piece threatened the whole structure. I remember one delegate who insisted that any strong federal government would inevitably lead to tyranny, not might lead, not could lead, but would, with absolute certainty. No evidence, no argument, no historical example could sway him. His certainty made him rigid, and his rigidity made him irrelevant to the actual work of compromise. Contrast this with James Madison, who entered the convention with strong convictions about the need for federal power, yet remained intellectually flexible enough to adjust his positions. He advocated passionately for proportional representation, yet when the Connecticut Compromise emerged, he accepted it. He didn't abandon his principles, but he recognized that certainty in method should never override commitment to the ultimate goal. This is the crucial distinction. Conviction in purpose can coexist with flexibility in approach. The men who succeeded in Philadelphia were those who held firm to their core values: liberty, representation, limited power, while remaining open to various mechanisms for achieving those ends. I learned this lesson repeatedly throughout my life. In my scientific work, I approached each experiment with hypotheses, but never with certainty about outcomes. The electricity flowing through my kite string taught me truths I couldn't have imagined beforehand. Had I been certain of what electricity was before I tested it, I would have missed the actual discovery. In diplomacy, the same principle applies. When I negotiated with the French, I arrived with clear goals but uncertain methods. Had I insisted on only one approach, one form of argument, one diplomatic strategy, I would have failed. Instead, I adapted, learned, and ultimately secured the alliance that won our independence. The wisest among us understand that certainty is a luxury we cannot afford in matters of genuine importance. The higher the stakes, the more crucial it becomes to question, to test, to remain open to correction. I have watched brilliant minds shackle themselves with dogma, insisting they possessed a complete understanding of subjects still shrouded in mystery. These were not foolish people, they were often scholars, scientists, men of considerable accomplishment, yet they could not tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty. They needed their answers wrapped in absolute conviction, delivered with unwavering confidence. This need for certainty becomes particularly dangerous when it masquerades as wisdom. I have seen it in political discourse, where leaders proclaim their solutions as infallible, brooking no debate or refinement. I witnessed it in religious institutions that claimed exclusive access to divine truth, punishing those who dared to question. The pattern repeats across every domain where human ego intersects with human ignorance. True intellectual courage requires something far more difficult than defending your existing beliefs. It requires the willingness to examine them with the same skepticism you apply to ideas you oppose. When I designed experiments with electricity, I did not simply seek to confirm what I already suspected. I structured my investigations to potentially disprove my hypotheses. This is the essence of honest inquiry. The humility I am describing does not mean abandoning conviction altogether. I held strong beliefs throughout my life about liberty, about human potential, about the possibility of self-governance. But I held these convictions as provisional truths, always subject to refinement through experience and evidence. This approach did not weaken my commitments. It strengthened them by ensuring they rested on solid foundations rather than wishful thinking. Consider how differently history might have unfolded if more leaders embraced this epistemic modesty. How many wars have been fought by men certain of their righteousness? How many opportunities for progress have been lost because those in power could not admit the limitations of their understanding? The cost of false certainty extends far beyond individual error. It shapes the trajectory of civilizations. I am not asking you to become paralyzed by doubt or to abandon the necessity of action despite incomplete information. Life demands decisions, and we must often act before all evidence is gathered. What I am asking is that you carry your uncertainties consciously, that you remain alert to contradictory evidence, that you build into your thinking the assumption that you might be wrong. This practice transforms uncertainty from weakness into strength. When you acknowledge what you do not know, you open channels that rigid certainty blocks. You notice details that would otherwise escape you. You hear objections that would otherwise fall on deaf ears. You adapt to circumstances that would otherwise blindside you. Consider the merchant who plans a venture with absolute confidence in his projections. He has calculated every expense, predicted every outcome, and accounted for every variable. His certainty is magnificent. It is also dangerous. When the weather shifts, when consumer tastes change, when a competitor emerges with innovation he did not anticipate, his rigid plan becomes an anchor dragging him toward bankruptcy. He cannot pivot because his entire structure depends on his original assumptions being correct. Now consider the merchant who plans the same venture, but holds his projections lightly. He believes his calculations are sound, yet he builds in reserves for the unexpected. He monitors for signs that his assumptions might be flawed. He prepares contingencies. When circumstances shift, he is not psychologically invested in being right, he is invested in succeeding. He adjusts. He survives. Often, he thrives. The difference between these two is not intelligence or effort. It is epistemic humility, the willingness to hold knowledge provisionally rather than absolutely. I see this same pattern in matters of governance and policy. The legislator who approaches every question with unshakable conviction becomes a tyrant, even with noble intentions. He knows what the people need, knows what justice requires, knows what prosperity demands. He will not listen because he already knows. And when his policies produce suffering instead of flourishing, he blames the people for failing to understand his wisdom. He doubles down. He becomes the problem he sought to solve. The wise legislator, by contrast, approaches policy with a hypothesis rather than dogma. She believes her proposal will produce good outcomes, but she watches the results with genuine curiosity. If the evidence contradicts her expectations, she revises. She is not weakened by this flexibility, she is strengthened by it. Her goal is not to be proven right, but to achieve beneficial results. She measures not just outcomes but processes. She asks not only, "Did this work?" but Why did it work? What can I learn? What would I do differently? This habit of reflection transforms every experience, success, or failure into education. Consider the diplomat who fails to secure an agreement. The inflexible operator blames the other party, declares them unreasonable, and repeats the same approach more forcefully. The adaptable diplomat reviews the entire negotiation. Were my assumptions about their priorities accurate? Did I listen as carefully as I spoke? Were there signals I missed? What would a different approach look like? This reflective practice creates a feedback loop that generates continuous improvement. Each iteration becomes slightly more effective than the last. The adaptable person also recognizes that different situations require different versions of themselves. The demeanor that serves you well in commanding a military unit may not serve you in comforting a grieving friend. The boldness that works in entrepreneurship may not work in diplomacy. Psychological flexibility, the ability to shift your approach based on context, is a form of social intelligence that the rigid operator entirely lacks. I have watched people destroy relationships by applying the same behavioral template to every situation. The manager who leads through intimidation at work and wonders why his family resents him. The academic who debates every family dinner as though defending a dissertation. These individuals possess only one tool, and they attempt to use it for every task. The adaptable person cultivates a repertoire of approaches. She can be firm when firmness is needed, and gentle when gentleness serves better. She can lead when leadership is called for, and follow when another is better positioned. This is not inconsistency or hypocrisy. It is sophisticated judgment about what each situation requires. Perhaps most importantly, the adaptable person understands that adaptation itself must be balanced. Not every wind requires you to adjust your sails. Some principles are worth maintaining even when they prove costly. The question is discernment. Which elements of my approach are essential to my integrity and effectiveness, and which are merely habits that I have mistaken for principles? I learned to distinguish between productive stubbornness and destructive rigidity through repeated failure. When I insisted on printing controversial material that alienated potential customers, was I standing on principle or indulging my ego? When I refused to compromise on the quality of my newspapers, even though cheaper alternatives would have increased profits, was I maintaining standards or clinging to perfectionism? The answer revealed itself through consequences. Principles that serve a larger purpose beyond your self-image are worth defending. Habits that merely reflect your comfort zone should be questioned. I maintained my commitment to clear writing because it served readers. I abandoned my youthful need to win every argument because it served only my vanity. This brings me to perhaps the most delicate aspect of adaptation: knowing when to abandon an entire endeavor rather than continuing to adapt within it. There is nobility in persistence, but there is also wisdom in strategic retreat. Not every path leads somewhere worth reaching, no matter how skillfully you walk it. I speak here not just of business ventures but of relationships, commitments, and identities we have constructed for ourselves. Sometimes, the most profound adaptation is admitting that what you are attempting to adapt to is fundamentally incompatible with who you are or who you wish to become. I walked away from Boston not because I lacked the resilience to stay, but because remaining would have required adapting in ways that would have diminished me. My brother's apprenticeship offered no room for the kind of growth I needed. Continuing to adjust myself to fit that constraint would have been maladaptation, surviving in an environment that prevented thriving. How do you know the difference? Between giving up too easily and persisting too long? Between healthy adaptation and self-betrayal? I developed a simple test over the years. Ask yourself, is this environment or relationship asking me to become more of what I value in myself, or less? The environments are worth adapting to expand your capacity for what matters. The ones worth leaving demand you shrink it. I think about relationships the same way I thought about alliances. Some made the colonies stronger, more capable, more themselves. Others required constant diminishment, endless apology for existing. The best partnerships, whether personal or political, allow both parties to grow toward their better natures. Here's what changed when I finally left environments that demanded my silence. I didn't become louder. I became clearer. There's a profound difference. When you're constantly modulating yourself to fit impossible standards, even your authentic expression becomes confused. You lose track of what you actually think versus what you've been conditioned to think you should think. It's exhausting, that constant translation. I spent years in that exhaustion before I recognized it for what it was. I thought the fatigue was just life, just the cost of existing in the world. It wasn't. It was the specific cost of existing in the wrong world. When I changed my environment, the exhaustion lifted. Not completely. Life is still life, but dramatically. Suddenly, I had energy for creation instead of just survival. For building instead of just defending. That's your body's wisdom, by the way. That bone-deep tiredness in toxic environments, it's not a weakness, it's information. Your nervous system is spending enormous resources managing threats. When the threat is constant, the resources run dry. People call this burnout, but often it's something more specific. The depletion that comes from chronic self-suppression in service of maintaining connection with people who don't actually see you. I'm not suggesting you abandon everyone who challenges you. Challenge is different from diminishment. The right people will challenge your limitations while respecting your essence. They'll push you toward growth, not conformity. Toward expansion, not contraction. There's a particular quality to conversations in healthy environments. You leave them feeling more energized, more curious, more yourself. Even difficult conversations, maybe especially difficult conversations. In toxic environments, even positive interactions leave you drained. Because underneath whatever's being said, there's a constant subtext. You're only acceptable if you remain small. That subtext is more depleting than any explicit conflict. As I grew older, I became ruthless about protecting my energy. Not selfish, ruthless. There's a difference. Selfishness takes without regard for others. Ruthlessness about boundaries simply refuses to give what cannot be sustainably given. I had limited years left. I wasn't going to spend them managing other people's comfort with my existence. The delegation decisions became simpler once I admitted the truth. I wasn't irreplaceable. The printing business didn't collapse when I stepped back. It thrived under capable managers. The postal system improved when I appointed deputies who understood local conditions better than I ever could. The scientific experiments continued through correspondence and collaboration rather than personal presence at every demonstration. This wasn't modesty, it was mathematics. One person controlling everything creates a bottleneck. Distribution of responsibility creates resilience. But here's what nobody tells you about delegation. It requires trusting people to fail. I had to watch apprentices ruin print runs I could have salvaged. I had to read reports from postal deputies who made choices I wouldn't have made. I had to let younger scientists pursue theories I considered questionable. Some of those failures cost money. Some damaged reputations temporarily. All of them were less expensive than my attempting to be everywhere. Managing everything. Dying exhausted with my potential unrealized. The people who criticized my delegation never offered to pay the cost of my omnipresence. They wanted the benefits of my attention without accounting for the opportunity cost. They wanted me to sacrifice advancement for the comfort of their dependents. I refused. Not because I didn't care about them, but because I cared more about what I could build if I focused. The social costs were real. Relationships cooled. People who once praised my availability now complained about my aloofness. Former friends suggested I'd grown arrogant, prioritizing my work over their needs. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps there was arrogance in believing my work mattered more than their immediate comfort. But if that's arrogance, it's the same arrogance that drove every significant human achievement, the belief that creating something lasting justifies temporary social discomfort. I chose the loneliness of focused contribution over the warmth of diffused availability. Some nights I wondered if I'd made the wrong choice. Then morning came, and I'd returned to work that mattered, and the doubt dissolved. The pattern held. Every hour reclaimed from obligations, every relationship pruned to essential depth, every expectation I refused to meet, all of it converted into capacity, into impact, into the work that outlived the approval I might have earned by being more accommodating. The mathematics of this transformation is simple but unforgiving. You have, at most, 16 waking hours each day. Each commitment you accept subtracts not just its duration, but the transition time before and after, the mental rehearsal that precedes it, and the emotional processing that follows. A 1-hour coffee meeting actually consumes 3 hours of your cognitive capacity. I learned to calculate the true cost of every yes, not in minutes, but in what those minutes could have produced if directed toward the work only I could do. The cost of attending one more networking event wasn't the evening, it was the chapter I didn't write, the experiment I didn't conduct, the insight I didn't capture while it was still luminous in my mind. This clarity created a hierarchy that others found harsh. My printing work came before social courtesies. My experiments came before my reputation as a pleasant companion. My writing came before being thought generous with my time. And yes, my intellectual pursuits came before many of the emotional needs of people who wanted more from me than I was willing to give. I won't romanticize this. There's a coldness to such prioritization that makes it sound simple in retrospect but feels brutal in the moment of each refusal. Every time I said no, I saw the disappointment, the judgment, the recalibration in their eyes as they understood I valued something else more than I valued pleasing them. But here's what I've come to understand in these final years. Those who resented my boundaries were never going to do my work for me. They weren't going to publish Poor Richards for me, weren't going to fly my kite, weren't going to negotiate with Parliament on my behalf. Their approval, had I earned it through compliance, would have been worthless currency when I stood before the work that actually mattered. The people who did matter, the true collaborators, the minds that challenged mine, the relationships built on mutual respect rather than social obligation. Those people never questioned my boundaries. They had their own. We recognized in each other the necessary selfishness of anyone trying to do work that outlasts them. Perhaps the most liberating realization of my later years was this. The opinions that tortured me in my youth became whispers, then silence, then not even memories worth revisiting. The social anxiety that once kept me awake wondering what so-and-so thought of my latest pamphlet, whether I'd offended this person or disappointed that one had all dissolved like morning fog under the sun of accumulated years. I stopped reading my own press, if you will, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Every hour spent worrying about criticism was an hour stolen from creation. Every moment spent crafting the perfect response to a detractor was a moment I could have spent with a grandchild, or reading a book that actually expanded my thinking, or simply sitting in my garden watching the way light changed throughout the afternoon. You'll face this choice too. The world will hand you an endless supply of opinions about your work, your choices, your life. Social media has made everyone a critic with a platform. Every stranger a judge with a megaphone. You can spend your precious days in the comments section of your own existence, or you can close that window and return to work. I chose the work. Always the work. And here's what nobody tells you. Choosing the work over the noise doesn't make you lonely. It makes you free. The right people, the ones worth keeping, they don't vanish when you stop performing for crowds. They lean in closer. They appreciate the real you, the focused you, the you that's too busy building something meaningful to worry about maintaining a facade. The relationships that survived my boundaries were the ones that deserved to survive. The friendships that couldn't tolerate my focus were friendships built on my availability, not my substance. There's a profound difference. One is transactional, the other transformational. I'm not advocating coldness or cruelty. I'm advocating clarity. Clarity about what matters. Clarity about where your energy goes. Clarity about the difference between being important and doing important things. Most people never make that distinction. They confuse being known with mattering, being liked with being valuable, being busy with being productive. These confusions consume entire lives. Don't let them consume yours.